And for those who haven't heard his story, it is heartbreaking, and it really um, is an indicator of how far things have gone as far as the transgender movement goes. Rob, do you just want to jump right in and tell us your story?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because I kind of was doing a bit of homework on you before we got on, and I know that at one point you were part of Barry Sanders' campaign, and it's interesting because I was a bit like that going back a number of years as well. Like I was looking at Barry Sanders and Hillary Clinton and going, boy, I hope Barry Sanders wins. I hope he gets the presidency. And how far have we come? And
Yeah,
you
it's amazing when I look back. On Facebook, you periodically get, 5 years ago today, what was happening in your life. And
know,
I just realize how much the world has changed and how much my worldview has changed as a result of what's happening with the transgender movement, because it really opened my eyes as to um, sort of the horrible things that are happening that the liberals, the left, the Democrats, whatever you want to call it, are pushing. And I don't even know if it's the left or the liberals or the Democrats. There's some element out there that's just pushing this narrative that is just so damaging. And I can't even imagine, now I have no sense of affiliating as a Democrat anymore.
no, and that's kind of what makes, my story and yours as well just so interesting is that we didn't see the evil that lurked just below the surface with these different platforms and agendas. They looked like they were all about being inclusive and all about love and that's not at all what's going on. But that's what we're supposed to know. But I'll get into the story because otherwise I'm jumping ahead with things. And my daughter, and this goes back to like grade 4 or 5, was having issues in school, lots of different little problems, nothing serious, was kind of hanging out with the boys. I thought it was a good idea to set her up with a school counselor. We came up with what they called a safety plan at the time, and then certain things that she could look forward to if, she was feeling a bit depressed. And one of those things was that we had planned a trip to Disneyland. And I'm kind of skipping through these years really quickly because these things kind of happen in a chronological order, but for the sake of time and getting to some of the other stuff. But eventually, in grade 7, I guess she had seen this video, Handsome and Majestic, and another one I think called Boy out of Sweden, where I know the video in Boy, they show this girl cutting her hair. The mom is demonized for trying to, sort of, be a parent and say, well, this isn't your issue. I know the whole way through it, I saw mental health issues, and that's what I always try to address. But unbeknownst to me as a parent going through this, I didn't know what was actually going on behind the scenes with the school counselor, the agenda. I was very naive. In fact, I even bought her one Christmas a transgender flag because I thought, you know what, I'm just going to embrace it. They call it, socializing yourself in that gender role. And I thought, she'll snap out of it. I mean, girls want horses, they want ponies, boys want different things. And it's a phase like everything else with these kids. And they're kind of at that point coming into puberty, among other things. And so it didn't concern me too much. And then in grade 7, she had a crush on her teacher. It was her first male teacher. And I thought, well, this is kind of normal for an impressionable young child, grade 7, to say, yeah, my first male teacher got a bit of a crush. In fact, the reason I know it is because the teacher, it became a bit of an issue to the point where the school had to notify me of this. However, I also came to realize at the end of that 7th year, or grade 7 year, that she had changed her name in the yearbook. The school didn't even tell me they had done this. And I phoned the school and I blasted the principal because I
So
thought,
they
okay.
actually at school were referring to her by a different name, and they hadn't told you.
They didn't even tell me.
Were they
No,
using different pronouns as well?
I don't know to what extent things are going on in the school. And I can't use the names, and it wouldn't be helpful. But they were using a male name. It's kind of a pseudo male name, sort of like you get some of these androgynous names. But still, it was the intent of being a male name, nonetheless. And And then shortly after she graduated from grade 7, because that's how it works in Canada, you have elementary school ends at grade 7, and then you start grade 8, and that's high school. My ex-wife suddenly had her in touch with this counselor called Dr. Wong. And
Wallace Wong.
Wallace Wong, yes. And Dr. Wallace Wong, at the time, I was told that it was my ex-wife told me that she had found him. She was paying privately for it, and that he was the expert in British Columbia and all this, and it would resolve everything. I met with him a couple times, and I explained to him over and over again, these are mental health issues. You know, she's going through typical things that a teenage child does.
Now, is
You
he
know,
an endocrinologist or a pediatrician, or what are his credentials?
he's simply a psychologist, but this is
Yeah.
apparently his area of expertise is transgender. And it was funny because when I first met him, I asked my ex, I said, is he married? And she goes, yeah, but she didn't tell me to who or to what. So I kind of had a sense that things were going to be, but I was naive at the time again, right? And, and but you know, when I met him, I thought, okay, well, he's listening to me. He's understanding that she has mental health issues. I mean, it's in the report that he put out because he does in his assessment, you know, mention the things that I said.
And you're doing essentially what good parents do. I feel like you're in touch with the school, you're following up on concerns, you're really, to me, that's exactly what a good parent should do in the case like this. Unbeknownst to you, there was this whole other agenda going on.
Had no idea. And that's why, and we'll get to that. That's why I talk about it. That's why I broke my gag order, because I'm not the only one that you're not supposed to know what's going on. So, so moving forward, going into grade 8, she now ends up with a crush on a male PE teacher. And so I'm doing everything I can. In fact, I suddenly find out that she's trying to commit suicide. I don't think it was serious. So right away, as soon as I find out, I bring her to the emergency hospital here in Surrey, British Columbia. And it turns out that she is feeling this way because of the fact that that male teacher, she got kicked out of the class because she was so overt in her her tactics in terms of trying to grab, you know, his attention. And it overwhelmed her, I guess, emotionally, that this rejection that had occurred. And that was the reason she was doing it. However, those files are sealed. And the lawyers on the left, and they're activist lawyers, and this is, of course, jumping ahead to the court case, would not unseal those. They kept saying, no, she was committing suicide because of gender dysphoria and all this other stuff.
It's so interesting that you say that, because when I was transgender, when I had that, identity, when I was sort of grappling with it, I had very strong crushes on adult teachers as well. So that's very interesting. And I remember once I was on the ski lift with my ski teacher, and we were going up the lift, and he leaned over far enough, and I kissed him quite a solid kiss, and I was probably about 7, and I just remember the look of horror on his face, and it was complete rejection, thankfully, which is a good thing. That's what an adult should do. But it's interesting to me that your daughter had that same thing going on, that sort of that inappropriate, overt desires for older men, while at the same time kind of grappling with her gender.
Yeah. So, and again, still thinking that Dr. Wallace Wong is, a good person, and he's going to do the right thing, and he is the expert on this. And I'm thinking, well, of course, there's nothing here that points to her being transgender. Nothing here at all. Maybe a tomboy, maybe lesbian. Then why the crush on a male teacher doesn't really line up with that. So we get in for an emergency session with him, and he has his assessment ready to go. And in his assessment, he explains that she is a prime candidate for cross-sex hormones, that she has
She's like 14 now?
13.
13?
13
Wow.
that, yeah, she's 15 now.
Is she in the room while this assessment is being explained to you?
Yeah, and I will, because yes, she was. I was horrified at that. So he comes out and he says that she's a prime candidate, and I'm looking through the assessment, and I said, well, what about the male teachers? And he goes, oh, that's easily explainable. And it's in his assessment. And he says, well, she's a girl, but she's actually not a girl. She's a boy, but she's a gay boy. That's hence the crush. So she's actually transgender, but a boy who's gay. I mean, it was
Yay,
absolute
boy.
insanity
Did you just feel like you were like on Candid Camera or in Twilight Zone or something? I mean, to me, it's beyond absurd to have an expert saying something like that. And then for your daughter to be right there hearing that.
it was ludicrous. And my daughter's sitting right there. And I went home and I emailed him and I blasted him. I wouldn't use the name doctor in front of his name. I said, "How dare you do this in front of her?" I said, "Now she's like a kid in a candy store. All she wants is cross-sex hormones or testosterone," as he put it. Um, and and all because you made what I consider the biggest professional mistake of your life, because parents, you talk to parents privately about their children, not having the minor in the room. I mean, I come to realize later, this is a very deliberate tactic. But at the time, I just thought he was just more or less just unprofessional. And he actually apologized, sent me an email of apology. Uh, but I don't think he meant it. I just think he just thought, well, I got to, whatever.
Placate you.
Right. Placate me. So anyways, at that point, I'm super frustrated with everything. And I even said to my ex-wife, and she said, "Okay, I'm going to give you some time to go find, mental health experts to deal with her." And so I did. I actually even phoned the police. I brought her into a special a program called the START program, where they gave her some coping skills in different things, where you squeeze a ball, for example, if you're feeling stressed out in your hand, or you elastic where you pull it. And I thought, okay, well, this is what she needs. This is the kind of help that is necessary with her. And then finally, I took her to my family doctor, and God bless his soul, he's passed away at this point. But and I brought her in because I thought, well, maybe we can put her on some kind of medication, because I know children that have OCD and stuff, they end up with medication and things kind of disappear and go away. And he kind of said, well, unless you get like a child psychiatrist, he goes, we don't like to do that as physicians with children. And he just kind of said the same thing that the START program kind of told me, is coping skills and just these kinds of ideas. And then of course my daughter brings up, oh, by the way, I have a referral to Children's Hospital in Vancouver with an endocrinologist.
Oh.
Because Dr. Wong had referred her, but we needed a second referral for her to get in there. And so my family doctor, had no idea what any of this was about. And we discussed it a little bit, and we thought, okay, well, this is BC Children's Hospital. This is a big, big hospital. There's going to be psychiatrists there. We're finally going to resolve this. I mean, this is all a bunch of nonsense. And so we agreed to do the referral. He hasn't even seen a referral like that before. He had to get his office staff to dig one up, and he'd never looked at one before. But we just kind of thought, well, this is BC Children's Hospital. They're respectable. I mean, they're a big name down here or up here in Vancouver in terms of a hospital that deals with children. And so I agreed to that, thinking this was now going to be a path forward that would be positive. Dr. Wong is now in the past.
Now you're getting to the real experts with kids who are going to know what they're doing.
That's what I thought. And so come August of 2018, my ex-wife brings my daughter to see this endocrinologist and his team. Within an hour of being there, they were going to pump her full of testosterone. They hadn't even consulted me.
Right there, they were going to just...
Right on the spot. No consultation, nothing at all. It
Wow.
was like they had rubber stamped it. And so it was interesting because it was my ex-wife that called me and said, "Hey, Rob, they're about to do this." And I said, "No, stop them." And so they did, because of course their idea is, well, let's get the father on board, because they figured they could work me over, because that's what they do, is they work you over and brainwash you into believing that you're a terrible parent if you allow your daughter, and we'll get into the suicide stuff because it's just the craziest thing they've got going for them, and yet it's their trump card.
And is she now 14, or is she still 13 at this point?
At that point, she was now 14.
Okay, so they were going to just go straight to cross-sex hormones, just go straight to testosterone.
Straight to it, yes, and puberty blockers, the whole works, the whole chemical alchemy.
Castration, yeah, just sterilize her.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no second questions. I mean, I intervened. I was able to stop it, and it was thanks to my ex-wife giving me that phone call. And so my ex-wife drops off their consent form, which really is not a consent form at all. It's just they're going to do what they want, I find out anyways. But it's just that you sign it so that you feel better about it. And then right in there it says, this is an experiment. We don't know the long-term consequences. This will probably sterilize your child. She'll have increased risk of heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. I mean, it was an endless list of things: osteoporosis, bone density diminishing. Um, and I thought, and even in this form, it says, and by the way, we will not be changing your daughter into a boy because that's impossible. Like, it's impossible in terms of DNA and chromosomes. They even acknowledge that. And they also say, and going down the road, you know, she'll have the option in her own judgment to pursue things like mastectomies and other operations. And I said, well, of course I'm not signing this. And I didn't. So I held out. I had a social worker from the hospital who was part of that team harass me for months. And I said, I'm not doing it. And then finally in December of 2018, I get a letter from them saying that under what they call in British Columbia, the Infants Act, the child has the right to make their own choices on matters like this.
Matters like cosmetic treatments,
Yeah, all these different,
corrective cosmetic treatments that are going to ruin her health. That's
apparently,
bizarre.
apparently, and we can get into abortion, and this is why this Infants Act, I mean, I can tell you about kids being yanked out of school at lunchtime and having abortions done. Their parents don't even know they were pregnant in British Columbia. Yeah, so that's what's going on. So the Infants Act, that's what they use. And they said, well, under the Infants Act, your child has the right to make these choices, and they can take it away from the parent. And they said, you've got roughly 2 weeks to get into court, or we're just going to go ahead and do it. And so I did. I went to court. And that's what started the whole court proceedings that I've been in. That eventually brought us into the BC Court of Appeal, which is the second highest court under the Supreme Court of Canada. Yeah, you know, we started out in provincial court. I got 2 quick injunctions under provincial court that delayed it so we could get into what is here the BC Supreme Court. And essentially what happened is all of a sudden this activist lawyer named Barbara Finley jumped on board, and we had another guy, Morgan Auger, who was sending tweets and all these other things and trying to appeal to my ex-wife.
And they are such bullies, and they have so much money. And
personally, I think they're a bunch of cowards, but they do have a lot of money.
Your case got public because of the activists on their side.
They had all of them. They were all in there. And so we go in finally into the BC Supreme Court. We have a Justice Bowden. He may have read that ruling or seen parts of it. We actually went in there because we were just trying to get an extension so that we could get our case heard in a proper way. So we put our experts together. Well, Justice Bowden decided to make a ruling. Nobody even asked him to make a ruling. He just went ahead and did one. And it was the craziest ruling ever. I could not refer to her by female pronouns, among other things. And
even in the privacy of your own home?
Privacy of my own home, I had to affirm her. Otherwise, that was a crime.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy ruling that took away all my rights as a parent. She was given the right to change her name, even though parents aren't given. I mean, she's a minor, remember? Yeah, she was given the right to change her identity in vital statistics in Canada and change her identity from male to female.
So she is legally now male in Canada?
She is. Yep.
Wow.
And she had about 3 days after the Bowden ruling.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they put a publication ban on the whole thing. And I mean, there's more to that ruling. That ruling, thankfully, has somewhat been overturned by the BC Court of Appeal, which we can get to.
How do they justify controlling your speech to that degree? I mean, I'm familiar with U.S. court systems. What authority do they have the authority in Canada to do that? I mean, that just seems like such a violation of your rights as a parent.
Well, I
guess they did it. So
they did. Yeah, they did it. And what happened is that I did an interview that evening with the Federalist, and I said, no, my daughter is being used as a guinea pig. She's part of an experiment. I said, I will not refer to her as a boy because she will never be a boy. And they had me back in court within 2 weeks in front of a Justice Mazzari. And she threw the book
because you had violated the injunction
by referring to her as a female, or as a male, pardon me. And yeah, by refusing to follow along with Bowden's rulings. And so Mazzari ended up putting a protection order on me, which is the worst thing you can put on somebody. And it essentially said that I could only talk about this case to my lawyers and I could only think the thoughts I wanted to think. I could not even tell my lawyer
Articulate
my
them.
thoughts to
Wow.
anybody, but they could not take away my mind. So whatever I did in the privacy of my own mind, obviously they couldn't police that, but they could police everything else.
Wow.
And at the end of the protection order, it said that if I violate without even a warrant, the RCMP or any police with jurisdiction in British Columbia could come and arrest me and throw me in front of a judge without even without any grounds. Even.
Wow. And what is happening with your daughter during all this? Is she, because it seems like that creates such a weird dynamic between a parent and a child, and she's got these activists who are encouraging her to really vilify you. How did that impact your relationship with her?
What's interesting is the day of that protection order from Missouri, my daughter came over, and she told me, she's like, "Dad, by the way, Barbara Finley says I shouldn't be seeing you anymore." And that's the lawyer. Since when do lawyers get to parent and tell these kids who they cannot see? My daughter chose to come over, and she told me something very interesting. She told me a couple interesting things. At the start of the case, we were talking about the suicide stuff, and this is in January. The Missouri ruling came out beginning of March, but speaking of the suicide card, she told me point blank, because I asked her about, are you suicidal? She goes, "No, Dad, I'm not." I said, "Well, why do you say it?" She goes, "Because they're telling me to say it." I mean, that's the game, right? That's how they get what they want. And so they learn. And these adults in the room are lying and they're deceptive. I mean, at the end of the day,
Telling a kid to threaten suicide in order for them to get what they want is so incredibly dangerous.
yeah, no, totally dangerous. And it's coming from these activists. Yeah, it's sick stuff. And then again, like going now to that day with the protection order. I mean, yeah, she says, "I don't know what's going on in the court case." I'm saying, "Well, you're the client. You're not even controlling any of this." She goes, "No, they just do whatever they want and send me these big long emails I can't understand." So it wasn't my daughter doing anything in this case. It was the activists using her as a pawn.
Well, and it's in her defense, like it's got to be amazing if you're a kid who's kind of, having some issues, all of a sudden having, this group swarm in and just suddenly you're the star. They're like um the activists are just going to affirm her and tell her how great she is,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that that's just got to be incredibly confusing to her.
Although what's interesting, and I should touch on this because it kind of lands a foundation to how I got to where I am and how, is back in the middle of January of 2019, and I'd been in provincial court once. The National Post, which is our national newspaper up here, ran a front page story on the weekend edition, and it was about another 4 pages in the middle. And they ran this story, and they were actually going to use my ex-wife's and daughter's name. They wanted it. I actually had that blocked. And what they're used to on the left is that they put these kids on a pedestal, and I would have gotten beaten right away because they would say, "This poor uninclusive father, what a jerk, what a
Yeah,
this."
intolerant.
And the opposite
Yeah.
happened. They did not know how to handle it. The comments were endless against what they were doing to my child. And that's why they wanted to gag me. That was the start of that, because what they were used to having work for them completely backfired. And all of a sudden, I've talked to my ex-wife about this since, that their whole strategy changed. And it was about making sure I can't speak at all, because I just have all the momentum on my side in terms of what public opinion is. And they finally figured that out. So
Is your
yeah,
daughter at this point on testosterone?
she's been on testosterone since the Bowden ruling, so over almost a year and a half. Yeah. Yeah, it's too late.
I can't even imagine, Rob. I mean, uh, I just find that I've watched my kids do things that I didn't approve of, and had, incredible concerns, but I've never had to sit back and watch while somebody injected them with poison, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you, there are a lot of times I sit and I think about it. I try and keep busy but when I do focus on that stuff, I mean, it's like, I did everything I could to try and prevent this. And yet I'm helpless as a parent as I'm watching my child essentially being destroyed by an agenda that doesn't care about my child. They care about money and everything else that is meaningful to them. I mean, she's just a stat.
Yeah,
That's
she's
all.
a pawn.
She's a pawn. And I know with my ex-wife, she went through this grieving process because she was told to do that. She drank the Kool-Aid, and she's like, but I have to accept that she's not a girl, and I have to grieve the death essentially of my daughter, or her daughter is how she put it, and accept that I have a whole different child now. I've never gone through that grieving process. I mean, I've just watched them mutilate my daughter, and I don't use those words gently, because I don't want anyone that's detransitioning to feel like that's who they are. And in fact, I can come to a story where I know that that's not the case. But yeah, so moving on. Yeah, there were times where my daughter actually snuck over. She told her mom that she was visiting a friend. Mom dropped her off. I come home, there she is. So we've always been close. But as my lawyer, Carrie Lynn, would put it, they needed her to not be around me. It was key to their success. They didn't, they had to destroy this family in order to save their agenda and keep
And
their
they had
agenda.
to vilify you. I mean, you have to be the bad guy in this in order for their narrative to work.
Yeah. And
So
that
what
has
kind of changes have you seen happening with your daughter?
what kind of, sorry?
What kind of changes have you seen as a result of the testosterone?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, she can grow a beard now. Her voice is way lower. I mean, those are the two obvious ones. Her hair is short, but then again, she cut it short. So I don't know if that's a direct, I know that's one of the things that are sort of part and parcel with taking testosterone is your hair. You can never have that long. And she had long, beautiful blonde hair, and she'll never get that back again.
Yeah, a lot of the detransitioners that I've talked to, their hair thins quite a bit, and
Yeah.
sometimes they even start going bald.
So yeah, so there's been a lot of physical transformations.
Do you talk to her about your sadness regarding this at all? Or do you just try to stay away from that topic?
It's an interesting question because, at this point, I know I can't stop it anymore. It's too late. And I know she's surrounded by these activists. I mean, they've pretty much taken her into their nest, and they've managed to push me aside for the time being. I call it the time being. They have no idea what's coming down the road. And I feel bad for my ex-wife because she's going to wake up one day and realize your daughter has no interest in you anymore. And in fact, what my ex-wife said at the very first court date is, well, she can do whatever she wants. If it's a mistake, she'll have to live with it. And I'm like, that's not how parents parent.
No.
An appalling statement that she made.
Especially if a child already has some mental health issues. You don't just sort of, and that's one of the things that really is enraging me about parenting right now is I feel like so many parents want to be their child's friend and they're not willing to actually parent them. And that's one of the reasons we're in this mess is because parents aren't willing to stand up for their kids. They're not willing to be the parent, which sometimes is hard.
And I think if I don't want to get too much into my ex-wife, but I do feel that was a big part of why she did it. And then of course she got completely wrapped up in it to the point where I think she actually does believe maybe, but then again, you get to a point where you have to believe it because you've messed things up so badly that how can you go back on it?
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing is that, well, first of all, parents are told their kids are going to kill themselves if they don't do this. So of course that's emotional blackmail right there. And then once you've allowed that to happen, it would be really hard to allow doubt into your brain, because if you start questioning at all, then you're going to see what a horrible mess has happened.
Yeah, and if you play that tape forward, going back to the suicide card, which they love to use, but imagine that you're a child with mental health issues. They were never addressed. These people are saying that, this is going to fix all your problems. And I've always kind of pointed to this illustration is that it's almost like they tell these kids, you can just, forget about the person that you were. You are an upset, sad girl, and we can just start over. We can recreate you into an avatar that they can never really be. But yet, all the problems that they had haven't gone away. In fact,
they're just buried. They're
buried. And then you move forward 5 years, and then you've added these problems where they can't have, sex anymore. They can't have children.
Their bones are going to be breaking. And to top it all off, they've been told that they're born in the wrong body. And so their self-hatred has been affirmed and reinforced. Yep. And they've been encouraged to self-harm medically. And so it seems to me like if you're dealing with someone with mental health issues, those are exactly the opposite things you should be doing. You want to tell them that they are, they're okay the way they are, that, to embrace themselves as they are, not to encourage themselves to hate them so much that they have to become something else.
That's exactly it. So you've compounded all the problems that they had that could have been dealt with, and now you've added a catastrophe to the problems that you could have easily dealt with. Um, and there's studies out of Sweden, you've probably seen them, where they say 44 times suicide rate goes up. I mean, no
And
wonder.
these are completed suicides. These aren't attempts. These are actual
Right.
completed suicides
Yeah.
that go up just astronomically the longer somebody has medically transitioned.
And on top of that, and you're obviously you've experienced it, you've been called a TERF, and I don't even know that you're a feminist. I mean, that's typically the feminists that don't want the males in their
I'm
chain.
not a radical feminist.
But that's the
I've
new
been
thing.
called a men's rights activist, so I don't know what I am.
Yeah, and I think
But
that's
then I've been called a TERF, which is, for people who don't know, is a transphobe, trans exclusionary radical feminist, I think is what TERF stands for.
this, yes. And I think that term came out of England. I think it was even started by what is it, Mermaid? I think I don't
Okay,
know.
so the idea is that if your feminism doesn't include men who believe they identify as women, then you're trans exclusionary, and that
Yeah.
feminism should include all women, including men who claim to believe they feel like they're women. And if you
Right.
don't accept them, then you're a TERF, which I've learned is akin to being a Nazi.
Well, they're the Nazis. I mean, they have to realize that. I mean, I've seen quotes from Hitler where he says, one of his quotes, he says, in a generation or two, the parents won't even recognize their children as they move in a socialist, in a fascist pattern. Uh, and that's we're not the Nazis; they are.
Well,
But
and
people,
that's where they're so good with manipulating, though, is that they, they're the anti-fascists. They're the tolerant. They're the loving. They've branded themselves as, they're the rainbows and unicorns and love, and we're just these hateful, bigoted people. And so they've done an incredible job of branding it. And I'm amazed at how many people I talk to, and they just completely buy into it. And truth be told, up until a couple of years, I bought into it. I didn't even question it. Of course I'm going to be tolerant. Of course I'm going to be loving and fly my rainbow flag.
yeah, I know. I say this all the time. Is they've been able to really steal the language. They've been able to manipulate the language. I mean, we're looking at something that's pretty big right now. This conversion therapy, and it drives me nuts because I have people on that are with me and with you on this, and they say, "Isn't that great? They're going to get rid of conversion therapy."
And they
But
have
they
no
think,
idea what conversion, in Utah, they have banned any therapy that does not affirm a transgender child's beliefs, thoughts, or behaviors related to their identity. So basically, they're not allowed to do anything but affirm a transgender identity. And that's what's covered under the conversion therapy umbrella here. It's actually it's actually requiring therapists to convert gender dysphoric kids into transgender kids.
and a natural person would think conversion is changing the sex, and that's where the people get lost in this, right? And people think, well, if you're affirming their natal sex, when they've actually flipped the two and confused everybody.
Everybody, and they've also, I mean, conversion therapy has this history of, electroshock and ice pick lobotomies, and some pretty heinous things took place um, under the definition of conversion therapy. And in fact, on a lot of my videos, when I talk about conversion therapy on YouTube, Wikipedia actually for whatever reason, there's a Wikipedia link underneath my videos to a definition of conversion therapy. And it doesn't include all the stuff that we know is included in these bans. And so somehow YouTube is even promoting this narrative that conversion therapy is this horrible thing that we need to get rid of. And so they're using, it's double speak. It's that whole fascist double speak
Yeah.
where they say they're doing one thing, but in fact they're doing the other.
Yes. And so, yeah, so speaking of conversion therapy, when we went to the BC Court of Appeal, and that was in September of 2019. We finally got our ruling in January of 2020. And something that came out of that ruling that's really significant is that they did say, yes, Rob, you do have the right to tell your child other options. You don't have to affirm anymore. You can explain to her that she's making a mistake. They did give me that right. And what they also did is they said, under the Infants Act, it is not the child who gets to decide. Again, it's also not me, the parent, which is the shame in it all, but it's solely on the shoulders of the doctor to make that determination.
Which doctor? Do you as a parent get to choose the doctor?
Well, that I don't know, because the schools up here are really in the middle. It was SOGI 1, 2, 3 are running the show, and they're really targeting kids, vulnerable kids. I mean, they're good at it. They know what they're doing, and they're keeping this out of view from parents. And then when the parents, by the time parents get involved, it's too late, to be
Well,
honest.
and that's why it's so important to have, I believe, the more that people can hear your story and understand what's going on, because this can happen to anybody.
I was thinking that again the other day, and I thought, boy, if I knew what I know now, I could have navigated around this in a much better way. And that's why the most important thing I think I can do is break that seal of silence and expose what is going on. But they don't want that. That's why they want. I mean, I got threatened again with a gag order just a couple of days ago. I got a letter from Barbara Finley saying we're going to try and re-gag you.
So where do things stand right now in your case?
Well, I mean, right now I was brought into court for breaking the gag order. I did I did an interview with the Federalist. I did an interview with Laura Lynn TV, and then with another fellow named Frank Vaughn. And I said who I was, and I just told my entire story. And I was hauled into court on short notice. And in fact, Laura Lynn was hauled in on short notice, and a fellow named Jen Smith, because he was promoting the fact that he was going to interview me down the road. He hadn't even done it yet. He just pretty much said he's going to interview the father, and he got hauled in.
Wow.
And,
so am I going to get hauled in?
well, you're in the States, but trust me, they talk to all the Americans in the Canadian courts, but they know there's nothing they can do.
So by doing this interview, are you putting yourself at risk?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
So, but it's too late. I mean, I've done it. The last court date I had, the judge actually turned me over to the Attorney General of British Columbia, and they have now put me in front of prosecution services, and the Crown is now looking at pressing criminal contempt charges, and they will. And that could land me in jail for 45 days.
Wow.
So, but they're going to start throwing parents in jail for speaking about their own child and what's going on. I mean, then bring it, I suppose. I
Yeah.
know
And do you have enough support system so that if that does happen, that word can get out so that people can rally to your defense?
well, I've done something that's maybe a bit, I don't know if it's unique. It's maybe different, because there's certain people that report. They're just reporters. They come from, from newspapers or TV, and they're simply there to report. But I know that a lot of the people that report on the news, and yourself now is included as one of them, have an interest in this, which is different. Like the Federalists, I mean, they have an interest in this. Laura Lynn TV has an interest in this, and the list goes on and on. And so I've kind of created a relationship with these different groups of people, and they've sort of almost become friends in a way, as opposed to just this kind of typical, reporter story relationship. And so they're all kind of following it. So I think that if something like this happens, I mean, I can count on a lot of people to get that message out pretty quickly.
And I think the reason that there's been a shift in the relationship, it's not a interviewee relationship, is because your story is so compelling, and for anybody who cares about kids, they're gonna want to stand up for this, and they're gonna rally behind you for support, because this is just horrible. And I think most parents, if they hear your story and understand the implications that your parental authority has been completely taken away and has been granted to these trans activists who do not have the best interest of your child at heart. Your daughter is now going to have lifelong consequences as a result of this testosterone being put into her body against your will. And one of the reasons that parents are parents is so that they can protect their kids, and the courts have taken that opportunity away from you.
No, and I think that's what makes this story different than the other stuff that the LGBTQ fight at times. is I'm not going after an adult that wants to be transgender. I mean, I may have opinions on that, but that's not where my fight is. My fight, I think, is universal in the fact that what group of people, whether you're a Christian, you're a Muslim, you're a Buddhist, you're Jewish, you're atheist. I mean, one of my lawyers is atheist. My other one was a Christian, and now I've got a third lawyer who's a Christian. But I mean, it's a curious, different combination of people. I've got feminists that support me on this, but it's because I think we can all stand on this. At the very least, we just don't do this to children, regardless of what you want to monkey around with as an adult. This is, I think, where you have to draw the line. And I think that's why I hardly get any backlash. I hear people that fight different things and they're getting hate mail all the time. And I don't know, I think even the left is a bit scared to trample me on this one, because I think they know this is a game changer, what they're doing with these kids. And I think even they know they pushed a little bit too far, if not way too far.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned before we started recording is that when you were in court, you had a lot of experts lined up behind you to testify that these kind of interventions were harmful and dangerous, that they don't actually even cure the gender dysphoria that the child is suffering from.
Yeah.
But that the opposition didn't actually have any expert witnesses to justify taking your parental rights away.
Yeah, I know. I mean, to name a few, we had Dr. Laidlaw. I'm sure you know who he is. Obviously, we had, I think Walt Hayer was one of our experts in terms of his personal experiences. We had a fellow named Hasky Horvath from California. We had a whole bunch of not social workers, psychologists and psychiatrists that I can't even think of all the names that we had. We had Dr. Van Meter, Dr. Grossman, and they came up with nobody. The only two people that they had were the ones that they relied on at the very beginning. And this, of course, is the Court of Appeal we're talking about, where these experts were. But they just fell back on the same two experts that they had with the Bowden ruling at the beginning, which is simply Dr. Brenna Hirsch, who's the one that was going to inject my daughter within an hour, and then Dr. Wong. And instead of coming up with all these other new experts, they had plenty of time. Their whole argument was to blast all of my doctors and experts and say that they just are outdated. They're part of an agenda. They don't know what they're talking about. And then they turn to WPATH, and none of these people on WPATH are doctors. So
yeah, they're activists. For people who don't know, WPATH is the World Transgender Health Professional Association or something.
Right.
And it's basically an activist group, and it grew up out of activist roots, and their publications and their guidelines are written by transgender activists, not by healthcare professionals.
That's exactly it. And in fact, even in one of their latest bulletins, they even say that this is experimental. Even they've been forced to acknowledge that they don't really know the outcomes.
Well, and it's interesting because the NHS, National Health Service in England, there's been some undercover work about some of their clinicians now are speaking out about what's happening there. And they're acknowledging that they're medicating kids who have mental health issues, who have, that their transgender identity is the result of something else. And these kids are being medically transitioned when they should be getting supportive services instead.
And I'm actually very proud of what's happening in England right now. I mean, Tavistock kind of fell. And those are the people you're talking about, the whistleblowers. And I met, and you may know her, I don't know, Helen Boyce. She is an editor at The Economist magazine out of England, and she flew out to Vancouver, and we had a meeting because she's writing a book on all this stuff. So and that's in her private time. It's nothing to do with The Economist, but that's who she is. And she knows these kids that have detransitioned that are now taking this to the courts in England. And it's fascinating, the strength, because this is a social contagion, and there's going to be so many kids that are going to detransition. Like, I don't know that these people on the left, these activists, even understand what they're putting themselves up against down the road.
Right, because these stories are so compelling, because you've got these girls who have beards and deep voices, and they testify saying, I went through all these treatments. They told me it was going to make my life better, and it turns out it made my life worse.
Yeah, no, they got so greedy with moving the goalposts that they've created an army that's going to come and destroy them down the road. Like they've set up their own downfall. And And what's interesting is when I was talking with Helen Boyce, and I said to her, I said, I come across and I say they're destroying these kids, they're mutilating them, Dr. Mangalonian kind of Nazi stuff, or Frankenstein. And I said, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to these people. And she says, Rob, no, they don't look at it all that. They wish their father had done what you had done. And they like it that you're calling it out. And but at the same time, I said, but one of the biggest things that concerns me is that we have to be there for these kids. I mean, my role as a parent is to call it for what it is and try and stop it and educate parents before it happens. But when it does happen, we have to embrace these kids because I mean, my understanding is the minute they change their minds, these kids, when they get into their early 20s, the left just goes after them and just tears them apart.
Yeah,
Like
they
they are
deny that they were
ruthless.
ever they say you were never transgender, or you're just you're transphobic, or you've just been brainwashed by the opposition. They're
Yeah.
completely unsympathetic, unwilling to support these poor kids. And to me, that's another sign that this is about a bigger agenda. This is not about tolerance, because when kids come out and start talking about their experience, even when I talked about my experience of being transgender and how I got mental health services to help me resolve those feelings. These so-called tolerant people are coming after those of us who are speaking about our stories publicly. And so this isn't about tolerance. This isn't about love. This isn't about allowing people to be their authentic selves. This is about a much bigger agenda.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yes. No, my child is just a pawn in a cog of a wheel that they're trying to. It's about the agenda. I don't know. Is it about eugenics and population control? I mean, I've heard people say you look at the different things that are going on right now in the world. It's a bit of a culture of death. You've got abortion normalized, and now you're sterilizing kids, and then in fact,
And
not just
we're
sterilizing kids,
sterilizing kids. To
you're
me,
targeting vulnerable kids. That was
yeah,
asked
these
by
are
the
kids who
history
have
couple.
mental health issues already, and they're sterilizing them. And this is something that we've done in the past. This is a horrible thing that we used to do, and realized that it was horrible to do this. And now we're going back and doing it again, to sterilize people, really
Yeah.
without informed consent.
No, and then on top of that, you've got euthanasia, right? And euthanasia is expanding. I have a friend of mine, Anthony in Ireland. He's really battling some of the stuff up here in British Columbia and getting a lot of negative feedback from groups like MAID, who say that it's the dignity of death and all this other stuff. But they're actually pushing the euthanasia agenda even a little bit further to include children and saying, well, if you're depressed and you don't like, you're unhappy, you can consent now to euthanasia. That's where we're going. And then, of course, all this other stuff with the trans agenda, and the trans are the bullies in the movement. I mean, it's not the lesbians and the gays and the whatever else advise. They're the bullies. They run the show. I know it. I mean, they're running all the pride parades now. They pushed everybody out.
Yeah, and they're the ones who have all the money too. I mean, they're getting funding, and it's not surprising they're getting funding because, like in your daughter's case, no matter what happens at this point, she's most likely going to need some kind of hormones for the rest of her life, because her body's going to be damaged to the point where she won't be able to produce female hormones. And so she's either going to have to stay on testosterone or be on female hormones for the rest of her life. One way or another, she is now going to have to be a victim of the pharmaceuticals. She's going to have to, because our bodies do need hormones. Otherwise, they start to deteriorate pretty quickly. And so this is a great market for these pharmaceutical companies, that you get a kid when they're 13, 14 years old, and they're a customer for life.
Well, and here's the story. Here's the ignorance of people that you think are pretty intellectually clever and learned, right? Between the Mazzari ruling getting into the BC Court of Appeal, we actually appealed the fact to get a stay on the cross-sex hormones. And it was overseen by actually the Chief Justice of the BC Supreme Court, Chief Justice Hingston. And what he said, get a load of this, he says, well, if she wants to change her mind, stop the testosterone and just put her on estrogen, and that will just reverse it. And I'm just thinking, you have no idea. Just like mastectomies, oh, you can just go out
Yeah,
and buy.
when I heard that segment, Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who is someone who is mutilating kids on a regular basis in LA, and that's her attitude, that if a girl has her breasts amputated, when she grows up, if she decides she wants a pair, she can just go and get a pair. And to me, that shows like a complete disassociation from what our human bodies are. I mean, the fact that we have doctors who are so callous and cavalier about cutting off body parts is incredibly concerning.
In some ways, it reminds me of, and maybe it's still a craze, but all the plastic surgery people used to get, maybe they still do. And they think they're fixing something, but it makes it worse. So they keep going and they keep going until there's nothing left of their face or their body.
It's like Michael Jackson, kind of, he just kept doing more and more and more. And in the end, he
It just
was a
got worse and
mess.
worse and worse.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's a very good analogy, because this really is an attempt to run away from oneself. I mean, these are,
Yeah.
you know, and it's a very literal trying to get away from yourself. So you're trying to change yourself so much that you don't even recognize yourself, and the world doesn't even recognize who you used to be. And you're gonna, I guess, mandate that people have to accept your reality so that you don't have to face whatever it is you're running away from.
No, and when all these kids that kind of turn into early adulthood, and you start seeing their faces, you start seeing their images on TV. I think guys, I hope that these people that think, oh, you can just switch back, or they see that damage. You can't just go out and reverse a mastectomy. You can't just go out on estrogen to reverse testosterone, or the other way around. You can't just, if you've done all this surgery on your forearm, which is disgusting, to generate a penis, you can't just, undo that and take the penis away and fix your arm. I mean,
Yeah,
I
these
think
are permanent changes.
yeah, it's not as simple as people want to pretend. And I think that's another thing that they sell to the general public, is that, oh, anything can be changed back.
Well, and the other thing is they really, the idea that this will fix these kids, that, if you have a gender dysphoric kid, if they go through all these transitions, that they'll be fixed. And yet, even Johanna Osland Kennedy's spouse, who is actually transgender, a woman who identifies as a male, will admit that going through the full transition didn't alleviate her gender dysphoria. And most of the people who are transgender, Walt Heyer, Billy Burleigh, these, Sidney Wright, these people who are coming out now, they say, they did the whole thing, they went through the whole thing, and guess what? They realized it didn't help. And so it would be one thing if it was a cure, but it's not.
Not, and that's the misconception that they're selling everybody and parents when it's too late for them to step in, right? Most kids, yeah, they go through puberty. My mom told me a story where, she struggled during her high school years. And then all of a sudden she met my dad, and she was, because at one point she thought maybe I'm a lesbian or something. She didn't know, right? I mean, they struggle, and all of a sudden her whole life changed. It was just about getting to a certain place where your confidence rebuilds again, and you get through these struggles.
And that's what adolescence is that, they're going through dramatic changes, both physically and mentally. And one of the concerns I have about these puberty blockers is that they actually stunt mental development. So you're inducing cognitive delays on these kids. And I can't imagine who would ever think that's a good idea, that we're going to cause this whole group of kids to have cognitive delays. If that isn't some kind of, I don't even know what you call it. It's almost like a discrimination based on their mental health status, that we're willing to cause them to have these horrible delays and health conditions just because we're kind of afraid of the idea of calling it a mental health issue.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I know I mentioned all these other things, but yeah, that's an important one. And you're stunting the cognitive development of children that already feel that they have some mental health issues. Perhaps they're autistic is a common one. That's one category of kids that is constantly being lured into this nonsense. And yeah, we keep fighting. It's time to take the language back. It's time to call it what it is, a spade a spade. I've been calling this state-sponsored child abuse because that's exactly what it is, and at least in BC, because it's the government that said is now parenting my child and going ahead with this.
And I call it medical child abuse. I call it medical abuse. It is. It's there's no other situation where we justify inducing disease, which is what we're doing here.
Yeah, and if it doesn't make sense, I know one thing I've always heard, if it doesn't make sense, it's about the money. I think there's other reasons behind it, but there's a lot of money involved too. These are lifetime clients, whether they want to be or not. My understanding is that if you go off testosterone after you've been on it, that your life is significantly shortened. Like you almost have to stay on this stuff even just to stay alive.
Well, because you've induced menopause, you've turned a young woman's body, you've induced menopause. And so um, my understanding is that I actually just recently watched a video by a young woman who went through the full medical transition. She had her breasts amputated, she had her ovaries and uterus removed. And now she's looking at the research, and she is freaking out because she's realizing that she potentially just cut off a huge portion of her life. And she doesn't know what to do because uh, these are irreversible. I mean, it's you can take artificial hormones, but it still, the damage has been done. And she had no idea. Nobody told her any of this. And in fact, a lot of the things we probably aren't going to know for another 10 years because this is all brand new. You know, when I
Right.
was a kid and I had a trans identity, I got help. I got mental health services.
Yeah.
Nobody suggested that I go on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. And this is all a very new narrative. So we're going to have a whole I mean, they are this experimental generation, and we have no idea what the long-term effects are going to be of these kind of interventions.
No, I mean, I'm going to find out because I live with a daughter that's going to, as part of the experiment. And yeah, you know, that's why I'm looking ahead to the future and just seeing where do I fit in next. I mean, I'm still going to fight as a parent and hopefully educate so that other parents can, you know, like I said, try and navigate and understand what's going on. But I mean, I know down the road I'm going to have to be there for her. And
Well, and I have so much respect for you because you know that primarily your first responsibility is to be her dad, and she's going to need you. And I'm just so thankful that you recognize that even though, you know, she's gone through this transformation, that she's still your daughter and she still needs her daddy, and you're going to be there for her.
yeah, no, I see my daughter, all these children, they're nothing more than victims. They're absolutely victims. And I know some people may say, wow, just like going back to what my ex-wife said that first day in court, wow, she makes a choice, and if doesn't like it, she has to live with it. Well, that's not how I see it. They're victims. They got brainwashed into this choice. They got led down a path.
By
Nothing like,
authority figures, by counselors, teachers, doctors, by authority figures.
yep, exactly, right? People that who would think that they were trying to, you know, do harm to your child. I mean, I mean, even I trusted them. I mean, we went through that with Dr. Wallace Wong and these others. I mean, and Dr. Brandon Hirsch in the endocrinology unit at BC Children's Hospital. I mean, I was led to trust these people as well until I suddenly saw that, wow, this is, I mean, I woke up to it, and thank goodness I did. And, you know, a little bit too late, but hey, we got this thing out in globally now, and people are paying attention, people are learning, people are being educated. I think people are getting mobilized. You know, I hear from so many people that are really good people that just had no idea. And and I remember early on in this case, people would say, no, that's not going on. You're exaggerating. And this can't be. And pretty much right until I broke my gag order, most of them were still saying that to me. And when I finally told my story, people said, you're kidding. And that's why I did it, because I thought it was so important to let people know this is what's going on behind the scenes, and you're not supposed to know. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means they've done a really good job of not informing you, because that's actually the whole goal. You're not supposed to know. It's not your fault. They're just really good at what they do.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I try to keep in mind is to have compassion for the parents because they've also been victims of this movement. They've been given very bad information, misinformation, and they've been given it by people they should be able to trust. And so, you know, they're doing what they think is right, and it's going to haunt them. I mean, I have no doubt it's going to haunt them because you know, in 10 years down the line, it's going to become really obvious that what they did wasn't what was in the best interest of their child.
No, no, not at all. And
So as we end up here, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to discuss?
you know, I think we've kind of covered everything. I think you're up to date with the case. Obviously, the criminal contempt is the next thing I face, and we'll see what happens there. Um, I continue to go after Dr. Wallace Wong. I haven't given up on that. We've been filing complaints, and in fact, I got another update today that I haven't even had a chance to look at. So we continue down that road. We're going to go after my ex-wife for discovery to see what actually did happen over this last year and a half in terms of what my child really wanted in terms of seeing me and what happened because of their influence. So I think that's
And
going to be
that's a
important.
whole nother issue that affects dads all the time too, is that, not just in this situation, but in other situations where, kids are not necessarily allowed to be around their dad as much as they want because there's ulterior motives going on.
Yeah,
So if you can get some information about that, because based on what you've said, it sounds like your daughter has been wanting to spend time with you.
yep, she was going to come in here right as the coronavirus started, and then that became the newest excuse
Right.
from lawyers and the mom. Well, she can't come over because of the coronavirus, and I'm thinking that's not really how it works. But again, it's always excuses,
Yeah.
and they've, like I said, enveloped her and surrounded her. It's tough to get through. I mean, they are. This is the last child in BC they want changing her mind at this point in time, because that would look really bad.
Right. Oh, wouldn't that be phenomenal? Yeah, that would, yeah. And I suspect she will, though. I mean, at some point, I suspect she will. There
I
was one thing that I wanted to ask you, because you've talked about, this is a case that's going to continue to go on. Do you have any kind of a fund set up so that people can donate to help you with your legal expenses?
I do. It's a Go Get Funding page.
Maybe you
Uh,
can share the link with me and I can put it on the comments section. Because I feel like, I mean, that's one of my frustrations, is that these groups have so much money. They're funded so well. And for some reason, even I grew up in a very liberal household, and the narrative was always that, those conservatives have all the money, and that, the liberals are fighting against, these people that have pockets full of money. And yet now that I'm sort of on the other side of the issues, I'm realizing that doesn't seem to be the case, that there aren't these huge conservative donors that are funding people and helping people like you out, that the money has either it's shifted or it never really was on the right. But
yeah, no,
at this point, it's the LGBT activists that really are very well funded and can mobilize incredible support very quickly.
yeah, no, they have deep pockets on that side. Trust me.
Yeah. So I'll post that link. Is there anything else you would like to say before we finish up?
Yeah, no, well, thanks for having me on. And I mean, really, at the end of the day, I just hope people understand what's going on, and just, there's been this deception that's been pulled on so many parents and people, and people just need to be educated and understand. And I think if they realize what's going on, I have a feeling they're going to mobilize, and because I think every parent, instinctively wants to protect their children. They just don't know that they're not right now. And it's by default that they're not protecting their children because they don't know that they should be against
Yeah.
something.
And I'm just feeling really sad, Rob, thinking that you could end up in jail because you're standing up for your daughter. And that just breaks my heart. So thank you for standing up for your daughter and for
Right.
hopefully helping other kids not have to go through this. Hopefully your sacrifice and all that you're doing will save other kids.
Well, I hope everyone stays optimistic. I keep a lot of faith and hope in this, though, that we're turning this around. This
Yeah,
is
and
not a
and
good
it's
thing.
because of people like you. So thank you so much.